we very appreciate for your visit, official visit in Ukraine during the war. It's very important for us. Tampere University, University of Tampere, as I know, is the main university on the Scandinavian region.
Yeah, Tampere is a really big research university, and one of the reasons is that I think around 2015, thereabouts, we made a big reform in the university. So Tampere University is not like Polytechnic, but it integrated itself with technical university, arts, social sciences, everything together.
The question is about the collaboration, your collaboration and Shevcenko National University of Kyiv.
It was a sort of ambition or dream of mine for a long time to be able to visit or be a visiting professor at Shevcenko University. I started studying Ukrainian history from the first year at university, but this was not a topic that you could really get a professorship in Finland. It didn't exist. So for a long time I've been studying Ukrainian history, but most of the time for a person like me from Finland, I went to famous universities in the West. I had to study it outside of Ukraine, right? This was the opportunity for me. And until this mass-scale invasion, it wasn't possible for me to also teach Ukrainian studies at my university. My chair is for global history. After 2023, we were able to combine the two of them, but it was my big desire or sort of an ambition to be able to visit here and to work with colleagues and to meet with students. Why? Because I already had so much of the other kind of experience. So I was trained with the leading Ukrainian historians in English language in New York and in Toronto and also at Harvard and Cambridge, Boston. But I hadn't had that dimension. So for me, it has been very important. And after 2023, I was able to reach out to the university to try to create opportunities to come here.
Within the Ukrainian Studies or Studies of Ukraine program?
First in the political science program, I had the best contacts there. But from 2023, we also started to create elements for Ukrainian studies at Tampere University. So I had to engage with more different branches of Shevcenko University.
Yeah, it's crucial. We understand our role now, Ukraine's role in this system, but also the role of so-kind collaboration.
This is the longest partnership that we ever have and we ever had in our university. The beginning of this collaboration was in the middle of 60s, you can imagine. During the history of our collaboration in the 80s and 90s, even in our university, we had a Finnish center and Ukrainian Finnish center. We had a Finnish language, as well as in Tampere University as well. There were Ukrainian studies on that period of time. Unfortunately, since the middle of 90s, we lost Finnish language. And now, me personally, I'm working on re-establish Finnish language in our university and to re-establish Finnish center. It's not so easy because there are not so many specialists, and from that side, I do hope that our collaboration could really make these fundamentals and basics. For that, our reciprocal items and aspects of our collaboration. We are contributing within the studies of Ukraine, and you are also supporting us with the relaunching and reinitiating of the Finnish language, Finnish geopolitics, or other studies of Finland, I could say.
Because this experience from the 1960s onwards has become very, very important now during this war. I had the experience since 2022, after the mass-scale invasion, that often in very specific practical context, it turns out that one of the people in a very important position was actually an exchange student here because of that collaboration. So, for example, the secretary of the head of the armed forces, she's the one who organizes and signs all the pieces of paper for every single military equipment that has been sent to Ukraine. She was here. And she came to me in an event to ask, am I really here? Have I really been teaching at the one with the red doors? And I say, yes, yes, and so on. The second example is Speaker of the Finnish Parliament who has visited here. He's from the right-leaning political party.
He studied here in our university. He studied here as exchange student, as Rinna mentioned. So really these relationships that were started in the 60s, I was shocked when the speaker of the parliament started his speech in Ukrainian language. We were hosting twice the president of Finland. It was amazing when he came for the first time with his lecture on geopolitics. It was a great lecture, very deep discussion on world disorder.
Oftentimes in scientific collaboration you have to meet and then key people have to decide together to work together, right? Universities are such places that the professors actually lead the research work, and funding can help, common interest can help, but I think here it has been the key that there are many meetings. In the meetings you meet people and then you can go on. So if people in key positions have had these kinds of experiences, turns out during the war it's very important.
Extremely important, because now we are feeling that those people who were on that time students, we had these exchange programs. The whole group of Finland came to our university for the reciprocal exchange of the programs and the mobility. It was till the end of 90s.
Yeah. And so this is of key importance. And Tampere is a friendship city with Kyiv, so for sending generators here, I don't have any problem talking to city council in Tampere for them to get this done and to do very fast, right? Many other European Union countries, these have not been the biggest supporters of Ukraine, but in Finland we don't have such a problem. So sometimes I can see the results from 1960s until today, and of course I'm very worried that if we can't re-establish this, sometime in the future this could turn out to be a key mistake, maybe not for Ukraine but also for Finland.
Yeah.
Some of these relationships turn out to be important, and I think maybe it will be a different future, right? So now, during the war, many discoveries and technological advances have been made here in Ukraine. If Finland doesn't renew this kind of exchange and collaboration, maybe it will be us in the future who don't have the generation who've been educated here or who have had the personal contacts, right? So therefore, this exchange is not only in the interest of Ukraine, it's definitely also in the interest of Finland. Maybe not even now, but when these generations turn out to be 50 and 60. So that's also part of, I think, our work here is to think about that and try to observe what is happening today and try to learn also that how important it was that we have these people in key positions in Finland that I didn't know, but now I know. You didn't know, then you know.
And also you have a collaboration with the Baltic countries. So the question is about your collaboration with the Baltic universities.
How is our collaboration with Baltic universities? It's becoming more close, I think, in the last 5 or 6 years. And partly I think it is for the fact that we just have many more contact points, right? The Baltic Sea has a bottleneck. Now everyone knows Hormuz. I study sea areas, so I have been acquainted with the Strait of Hormuz for 25 years. Now the world has discovered it. So to get to the point, since, for example, in the sea areas there are new kinds of scenarios, we can try to think about new technologies to manage the questions about bottleneck, and universities can think about that and maybe then make a patent for some parts of the technology, right? That's what my personal idea about it is, that we work together with technological universities. We have, for example, the example in Finland of the ICEYE. I think it's ICEYE. ICEYE. It's a satellite that system that is very specific about traffic of
What?
Of maritime traffic, right? Looks from the sky. And
navigating system.
Yeah, navigating system. It's a very particular. You can look it up. But I know that those people who at the Aalto University developed it, they are also now owner of the patent and it. So that could be maybe one model to try to persuade the Finnish system that's very stable, but a little bit maybe slower pace, to get the universities towards these practical conclusions, right? In the next month in Tallinn, in May, they will have Nordic-Baltic 8 group countries, they meet, and one of the big talking points will be Ukrainian Studies and also Ukraine, how to collaborate together to help Ukraine, right? So I think that in terms of university work also, the more we have had public events where the Baltic countries and Finland and Nordic countries have been together, we've had just more contact, so more developments towards the future.
I have a question about your idea or maybe your thought about the project which is called EU counter-drone wall.
Finland has made initiatives towards the drone wall, but it's not very clear to me how far we have advanced in that. Also, I think that the drone technology is moving along in such a fast way that it's crucial, but it's very difficult to follow. Since the end of the Second World War until today, this system has been fairly fundamental for Finnish society, right? It enjoys a large support. Finnish people have very high willingness to defend the homeland. So the drone wall, in a way, is part of, for us though, is part of this kind of an overall system, right? So not only is there a general military conscription, military service is popular, it's something that for most people, you know, it's like a generational experience. You go to the military and then you meet your own generation of people from all over the country, because you're not like just going with people from your own neighborhood. Drone wall, to me as a social scientist, I think about it as how does it fit into all the other elements of the Finnish society that the military is part of? Why I'm talking to you about this, it may look like, it sounds at first like it's not the most relevant question. But drones and the drone wall and in the recent month the Ukrainian drones dropping on Finnish land, they can heighten insecurity or they can change some thinking, but they haven't. Why haven't they? Because we have a societal agreement about military service and about support for Ukraine. It's kind of very broad and very basic and very enduring. So drone wall to me as a social scientist is part of that. How to manage it, I am not so certain about the details. It's difficult, even if you are an intelligence person, it's very difficult to follow because the innovations and the movements are very rapid, but then they're also not disclosed, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I like to follow their Spiegel air correspondence. They are very good at normally knowing about this. So I have some sources where I go to look for information. But personally, I try to think about drone wall as something that's part of Finland's future. It's actually part of the way that we have our society framed. And I hope that we would rapidly be successful in developing it because it's actually quite important. It's not like a singular issue, but it's part of this whole like broad complex for me.
It was maybe 2 years ago. It was a huge attack of drone near this building.
I know. Yeah.
It was in October 2022, just here, just in front of the building.
Now, too many drones have the option to be noiseless.
Personally, I try to learn as much about the drones as possible. You know, like the different models, how to understand them, how do they work. Personally, like this. You know, maybe even the soundless drone is even worse because then you might have to be afraid all the time, even when you don't hear the noise. So for that reason, I think we have to somehow learn a new kind of societal language or a way to discuss it, right?
And to research it.
Yeah.
Yes,
Or maybe I mean like to understand what's happening.
Specifically youth and young people as students who are studying in universities, they should be skilled, they are creators and innovators, and then they are moving these new kind of field further. I mean the new field of drone, golden drone, or other innovative technologies. So we as universities and academic societies, we are relying on young people and students for giving them knowledge and then to be them as a creators and innovators.
And also in public dialogue, I think journalists have the capacity, but maybe also the duty to try to talk about the drones and to understand it, right? So you don't only hear the noise, and you know the different noise of the different drone, and it's something to be scared about, but rather it's something to understand about, right? If you understand something more about it, and we take it as a part of a societal conversation, maybe it can help not to be afraid of it as much, right?
Yeah, we have too many innovations on the front line, and not just on the front line, because front line changes any technology in 3 months. Just we have to analyze the reaction of environment, especially after the appearance of swarm threat. And it is very important for our defense, but also EU defense.
The EU was founded as that unity of states as a result of war, to avoid new conflicts and new wars. And when we are speaking about the intelligence and academic society, it's also about the peaceful instruments, how to develop the society in a better way. At the same time, we face the war. And we can see now that the war in Ukraine is also leading to another states on the turbulent times, interrupting trade chains on international level and so on. Globally. What we can see now and what we as an academic society, as academicians, what we can do. We can propose peaceful meetings. We can analyze, we can observe, we can dispel myths through sharing the knowledge and sharing the information, true information, in fair manner and with a critical thinking and analytical thinking. From one side, the university and the research part should analyze and research for further development and for new experiments and for new technologies that could be launched in universities, in hubs in universities with scientific approach. At the same time, the university society also could be, and the journalists, of course, should explain to population what is going on, what are these feelings, what are these technologies about, what that they are protecting people and so on, to avoid the unpredictability of the society.
Yeah. And we have also had this experience now in Finland. There are Ukrainian drones that are dropped somewhere, and well, it's obvious that we don't have the capacity to stop that from happening. Yeah. That's also part of the problem, is that it becomes obvious when that happens. The laboratories that work on these drones and other science developments, we're all part of the same university, which makes it easier for Ukrainian studies to work. So Ukrainian studies can be about architecture and AI 3D scanning of buildings. It can be one of the laboratories in Tampere and Hervanta that works on drone technology or on protecting electrical currents. We're all now part of the one university. It was a very painful shift, because you can imagine all the three universities had their own administration and they were very strong in their disciplines, but they were brought all together, and now one of the benefits is that we actually have all the different disciplines in the same university.
We have some answers how to protect ourselves against enemy drones, but it's not 100%. We can collaborate with each other to find the answers.
I don't personally understand, as I said, very much about the drones, but it's possible for me to take the tram to go to my own university's campus and go and ask them in the laboratory questions, or ask them if they would like to be part of Ukrainian studies and so on.
Humanitarian and
human knowledge and different things. And it is useful that the laboratories are in the same campus. So we can combine some historical and architectural and older knowledge about linguistic knowledge about Ukraine with engineering, for example.
As you already mentioned, you started with studying history of Ukraine. But here now we are speaking that study of Ukraine is much more broader sense. It's not only about history, it's not only about geopolitics, but it's also about the science, and about the research, about the new innovations, and about all that issues. So that's why also it's my pleasure to introduce to you and to present to you the analytical report that we have made concerning the world centers of Ukrainian studies and major scientific trends in Ukrainian studies. Because from our side, we can see now the studies of Ukraine now in the process of transformation. Because of this transformation and dynamic evolution of some simple things and to the more strategic issues, that we are dispelling myths from one side. We are fighting against this disinformation propaganda and fighting against hybrid fights and conflicts. And on the other side, we are sharing our culture and history, and we are also dispelling this myth through culture and history. And of course, the language.
We read Taras Shevchenko, we have history books, we have facts, we even have original documents that you can prove something was something. But the way that it turned out this year, that many of the doubtful, let's say international students, changed their mind was that there is a midterm in the middle of the course. You have to go and discover 3 different cultural artifacts about Ukraine that you like, and write an essay and tell the class what do you like about it. So it can be anything. It can be poetry, it can be punk band, personally maybe my favorite from Ukraine, music, it can be films, it can be whatever even documentary, but it has to be something that you discover yourself and then you tell. I think that in believing that there is such a thing as Ukraine and it has a history and it has a profound identity, it was very helpful that the students had to go and find it themselves, and it could be anything they wanted. For many students, though sad or not so sad, it was, for example, a documentary about Mariupol, because they had to watch the whole thing and then write about it, so they couldn't present themselves anymore as if something didn't happen. But what I learned in myself in the last 3 years, trying to think about the Ukrainian studies, it turns out that culture and identity has a big part in it, and discovering that. And in a way it goes very well.
Do you know how many students are there now interested more and more in studies of Ukraine in Tampere University?
Yeah. I have the basic course for the history of Ukraine, statehood and identity, has 89, 90 students, and hardly anyone drops it, right? So that's a lot. Normal. You have to have 10 students to have a course.
Yeah.
So it's for this, it's a lot. And about half of the students come from different countries. I would say EU countries, but actually there's been in the last 3 years always somebody from Hong Kong. They actually travel to be the exchange student because they think that this course can teach them something, how to solve a problem, small country, big neighbor. They seem to think that. So yeah, they are very popular, which is also good because, of course, with bad economic situation and declining resources every year, I'm afraid personally that university administration would call me and say, maybe this year you teach European Union in the world or something else, because you have already taught it so many years, so maybe all students have already done Ukrainian history, but this has not happened. Somebody suggested this to me. We've had increasing enrollment, let's put it that way, not decreasing. But students' opinions or ideas about Ukraine, though, have changed. Something that I was I found personally a little bit concerning was that this year, many of the students from other European Union countries, not from Finland, but others, at the end of the course, when they evaluate the course and tell about their experience, they expressed that although they had traveled to take this course and they wanted to take this course, that they had some hesitations about if Ukrainian history or identity is real, whatever that means, that it isn't actually something Russian or something semi-constructed, but that they had found at the end of the course, they would say sentences like, but now I believe in it. And as a Finnish person, for a moment in my heart, I found that to be very insulting, because if they think that about Ukraine, wouldn't they think that about Finland too? Short history, small country, really belongs to the neighbor in the grand scale, right? This argument for me is a little bit impossible if I want to continue my own identity as a Finnish person. But I learned to think about it then the very next day or the next week at least, that actually is the purpose of university education, right? You know, the magic of the European Union is that it allowed my generation, because Finland joined in 1995, so it allowed my generation to have this magical thing which is multiple identities. So you can be Finnish, you can be a historian, you can be someone who holds Ukraine in her heart very dearly. You can be many things at once. And if we think about our own history, the two world wars, those wars were about that you have an exclusive identity. You're a German, or you're Italian, or you're a nationalist, or you're married, or you're something, right? So I think when I tried to understand why is it that it was so important to discover the Ukraine through this cultural aspect, which I would have thought that I'm very bad at communicating because I'm not Ukrainian, I'm not born in Ukraine, and I'm better in the historical facts. I think it is about these multiple identities. Young people today are very focused on identity, and they can understand that they can be layered, right? So that's what I sort of learned from that.
How these collaboration, scientific collaboration and research collaboration, can be transferred into a practical and funding way?
It's not an easy question. Finland so far, because of our historical development, we tend to approach innovation but society from a very fundamental structured position, right? To think about the whole structure of it. That's why it's no wonder that Estonia has more startups and is more successful in it, because they have a little bit different operating model. Our strength is that the whole society supports innovative approaches in Ukraine, but our pace is much slower, unfortunately. It also has something to do with economy.
From my side, I think that your question is already innovative, because when we're speaking about the startups and something like that, we're speaking about something narrow, something national. Your question is more wider. And just now I have this fresh idea that maybe the idea of startups could be also something innovative and wider and broader from its territorial context. The last 5 years, 4 years, there are so many now new innovative forms of internationalization and collaboration. So maybe even startups, it would be not only a domestic issue for one university. As you mentioned already, with the further patents and ownership of that, but if we're speaking about that from the different angle, if we're speaking about that as a joint possibility to do something together, together even within the triangle, as you mentioned, Finland, Baltic states, Ukrainian companies and Ukrainian universities, it could be something interesting. It's something very fresh idea.
And in my mind, as somebody who studies the sea areas, you know, we all have a bottleneck. We have a strait around Denmark, you have a strait around Constantinople Strait in history. So we have sea areas, so there are also contexts that it can also be context-specific solution, right?
And also to broaden this idea about collaboration, international collaboration, maybe we have to think about the dual-use track. It is like the initial idea for creating of any product or service. Dual use.
You are totally right. Universities might be the unique space where actually just naturally the dual use comes, because at university you make a hypothesis, it might succeed, it might not succeed, but if it doesn't succeed, it could turn out to be very useful in some other way. This is just going to be a fundamental part of the future. Most of the things like GPS was a scientific experiment, just turned out to be very useful, right? So Moomintroll would know about one very early example of dual use. It's a children's story, but it's not really for children. It was written in 1939. The first book was called Moomintroll and the Comet. But the comet is really the winter war. It's written after 1939, so the comet is this red star and the sky is red because there's war. When Finland didn't have enough ammunition or equipment against the Soviet army, we made them innovated towards the Molotov cocktail. So lots of people did have empty glass bottles, and terva is something you can get from Finnish tree to light up, and a little bit of cloth, so you can burn the tar in the bottle and throw it. So Moomin would know something a lot about dual use from already from his early experience. But the reason why I think about that perhaps wars are such events that they engulf the whole society, right?
Mm-hmm.
War is not something that affects only parts of society. It actually still today affects all of society, and it often leads to very tragic transformation, even in the Second World War. So maybe in those circumstances, innovations like dual use tend to rise up because there is no other choice, right? Also.
Yeah, we have to find an answer.
Yeah.
On any war.
Unfortunately, this war that we can face now is also influential not only for the whole society, but it's also influential for the whole world.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Leading to the transformations on the global level, on the universal level. It's not only transformations from internal side. It's not only the transformations in our domestic institutions or in the state. These war, and especially Ukrainian war, also lead to the global transformations.
The drones don't only fly in Ukrainian or Finnish airspace, they can fly anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, work at the University of Ukrainian Studies, it's not always so philosophical. Sometimes it's something very practical, like the rector getting the dean from the architectural faculty with me in a room, and I tell him that I would like to now make sure that Ukrainian students thrive, and the studies have to become more dynamic, so what can we do? And a Finnish middle-aged man thinks for 2 minutes and says, well, you know what, we should protect our electricity network better.
Yeah.
We've been asking the government for money for this. No one has wanted to pay for that, but now when the drones are dropping, maybe the Ukrainians can teach us how to repair and you know, do that better. Then it also said, yeah, also doesn't Ukraine have the same problem that the railway network has with like Russia? They have to change it, we have to change it, maybe they can teach us how to do it better. We have heard that the thing, and then he thinks third, you know what we can do for Ukraine? Every student who does architecture in Tampere University has to learn how to do 3D scans about buildings. Maybe that's something we can do for them. So day to day, though, the Ukrainian studies is a very kind of practical field in a way. And the fourth thought was, okay, but this is going to be so much more work for some professors. How do we persuade them to want to do it? So from thinking in the head very rapidly of like just concrete things that one could do to how to do it. And it's not that the thinking at Tampere University, though, isn't that Ukraine needs something from us. It was immediately, okay, what can we learn from Ukraine, because we really have to.
Yes.
It's pure reciprocal approach, by the way. So this is the road with two flows, with two ways. Because from one side we can contribute, from another side this mutual contribution also could support each of us. And I also wanted to mention that just recently one of our professors from Institute of International Relations also joined the team, and it was a series of visiting lectures, and I do hope that we can continue with this exchange of scientific approach and academic approach, also to fill into existing lectures, into existing academic society within the studies of Ukraine, but also to refresh your lectures when you also visited us and our meetings with students is also very contributive, because this is the open mind that such lectures open minds for students. It also gives this platform for negotiating, for networking between them. And of course, in some 50, 60 years, those people who were involved in our collaboration will be so very important persons in the future, in Ukraine and Finland, or maybe somewhere in the EU.
Yeah, and of course we had a Ukrainian professor visiting, and I think it's not only symbolic, it's just, I cannot communicate what a Ukrainian man can communicate who's an international relations professor from here. It's a different thing having him in the classroom for the third semester of the year. So that was very important, but it also had some very concrete. Then when he's teaching in Tampere, the Ministry of Education director came to visit us. So it had also a kind of longer term planning aspect. But mostly I had thought about it, how important it is that we're talking about identity. Since I can't represent the identity, it's important that we have an actual human being. It's going to be much more difficult to listen to him and draw the conclusion that there is no such a thing as a Ukrainian when he in the classroom, right?
University is the space for experiments and for very new and fresh ideas. So if we could really share and make it broader within the point of view of the startups or even joint programs, not only for professors but even for students, as giving them this opportunity to provide the experiments in different spheres, or even maybe in the interdisciplinary aspect, through, as you mentioned, architecture or maybe other IT technologies that could be combined, and it could be something unique.
We have to think about science like about the methods, about the instruments against these wars, different wars.
I think that first of all, university is the place where the peace instruments are born. When the president of Ukraine started its idea with the peace formula that was presented the last time in Switzerland, when I was reading these items of the peace formula that are negotiated by the leaders, by the world leaders, each of these items could be analyzed through society and through the analytical research in universities. For example, energy and energy resilience, what we can see now, and you also mentioned this example with the students in Tampere University, who could have this case with the critical infrastructure resilience and electricity disruptions and so on. Then we can see energy nuclear contamination as well. It should be analyzed. It should be analyzed here as well, together with our partners. But we're speaking about mental health. It's also the sphere of analyzing. When we're speaking about the recovery and returning of children, it's a huge legal issue, how to deal with these legal procedures. Not only physical returning of children that were on occupied territory, but how to prove it legally. It's also the question, and the researchers are finding answers on this question. When we're speaking about the responsibility on the aggression, we are also speaking about the new instruments. And the professors, the scientists, the university society are working on discovering that answers, how to lead the world to peace.
Does Finnish Academy think about this?
Yes.
As Ukrainian?
Not maybe in the completely same way, but yeah. I will have a little bit more philosophical approach to this question. Although it's hard to follow up Ksenija because it's an excellent answer. From my own Finnish point of view, Finnish people, like Ukrainians, we don't often like to leave our homeland. I went to school abroad I was away from my country, I think 19 years. And I did it because I wanted to be the best at what I do, so I had to go to New York to study and discover this Ukrainian history, but most of the time I was always, after a holiday in Finland, sad to leave the country. I'm always at the airport with Finnair crying, right? But now, when the war started, to be honest, I thought to myself, like, okay, well, that's why I had to go to those schools. That this was the moment of, like, this is why. I have been educated so that if something like this happens, there is somebody who knows something about this Ukraine, right? And it has been my approach or my kind of response to this question since the beginning of the war. What I can do now is I can't do everything, but I can do everything that with my knowledge at the realm of answering people's questions, public questions, politicians' questions about Ukraine, how does it work, but also international relations. I think that, since I am not a member of political party and I don't work in it, I have the opportunity when I'm being asked a question to answer it as honestly as I possibly can, right? Mm-hmm. And in as much in detail as I possibly can. So I think that I consider it my role in this like that. But I think most people my age, I'm 49 years old, we all have a relative who have been through the Winter War and the Second World War. So when the war started, my first thought was like, okay, I'm going to have to work much harder now. I don't like to be in the public eye. I'm probably going to have to be in the public eye to answer questions because who else is going to answer them, right? And my third idea was that how am I ever going to explain this to grandmother? First she was 5 or 7 years old. She was afraid all the time. Now when this thing starts, she thinks that she has already seen this, you know. So for us, in some ways the questions revolve from that kind of territory, from the fact that everyone knows somebody who remembers the war. And everyone knows how severe consequences wars actually have. That might not be the thing everywhere else in the world, but in Finland it is. I have also now to think about peace. So here in Ukraine, sometimes the Ukrainian students ask me what happens after the war, if one has to forgive at some point the Russians or not, right? You can ask a professor a question like this. In Finland, I've tried to turn it around that I made in my courses, in global history courses, we have a mandatory book now that's called in English East-West Street. In Finnish language translated, it's called Return to Lviv. And it's a book about the genocide legislation that was created after and during the Second World War, but these scientists and the legal minds who came up with this, the term genocide, the fact that there is a law against it, they were all from Lviv, right? And the book is one that tells about this, what is a genocide and this legislation, but through the experiences and careers of these people from Lviv. That's why it's called Return to Lviv. So what I've done now is that I made it a mandatory course to read, because it's a very good book, but it's also a very vivid book. So I think the way to think about what universities can do is that just by smaller steps in Finland, but that the students read this book, then they can understand that the formula for peace, though, did come from these legal scientists. It doesn't mean that it's a recipe of what to do today, but one can imagine that something radically different is possible, right? That it's, they were able to coin the term genocide, they were able to give parameters to it, and then they were able to, at the end of the war, even have a legal procedure for this. I try to tell my students to think about peace like that something radical is possible at the end of it, right? Like radically different, radically positive. It might not be a legal formula, or it could be for children and refugees, it might be something else. But to try to be very brave. I have to tell myself to be very brave to give this interview and to do a lot of interviews. I'm an introverted person. Before 2022, I said no to 9 out of 10 interviews, just so because I enjoy sharing my knowledge directly with the person who needs it. But I decided to change it because the war changed the circumstances. Then I thought, I can't do everything. I can't come up with drone technology. I don't have the skill for that. And I'm not allowed to go and fight on the front lines of the Ukraine war. So what I can do is I can do my public role and try to be brave with that. I try to tell the students to try to think about brave new future, even if they feel depressed, or even if they feel scared, or even if the war goes on 4 years and it doesn't end. So in that way my answer is a little bit multifaceted, but this is very true about peace formula. It is actually true. I hadn't thought about it, but this is true. It's a universal formula.
It's universal formula that could be disrupted on each item, that could be discovered more deeply through analytical research, through the scientific projects and so on, and maybe specifically these items also could be laid down within the basement of the further projects. It's also some of the very fresh idea when we're speaking about the President's statement that if you want to negotiate about Ukraine, no negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine.
Yes.
If we are analyzing some of the aspects in the science and experiments in Ukraine, no projects about Ukraine without Ukrainian scientists.
Yes.
So it's also about the sharing of the studies of Ukraine.
Yeah, which is why it was so important that we have a visiting professor from here in Finland, right? This is the point. We cannot do just Ukrainian studies with me without Ukrainian professors.
And it's great that we have you here as well, because you're also sharing your experience with our students as well. This is this matching points, and this is the core element of collaboration.
So it is very important to find the answers on this peace formula. Thank you very much for this interview and for your mission.